All right, everybody who's on, thank you all so much for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and just get us on the screen here a little bit so you all can see us. And I appreciate you all coming. And today, what we're going to be doing is, by the way, the Zoom effect in aesthetics is for real. Like I was talking to somebody today, and all of our Zoom calls and WebEx calls have increased the ability or the need for all of us to get aesthetic treatments. And I'm seeing it right now. I've got massive wrinkles in my forehead. I had 3 people email me and say I needed Botox after my Instagram video last night, while saying that they would provide me with Botox. So that's I guess that's nice. But I appreciate all of you coming and tuning in. This is what we're going to do is go through the guidelines for non-surgical medical aesthetic practices that AmSpa just released. I want to say real quick though, thank you all for number one for tuning in, and number two for your questions, comments, feedback. There's a lot of passionate folks out there. I love it. I think it's great. It's really good to know that we're all that we care about the industry and that we're hearing this together. We had so much. There's a lot of the overwhelmingly the feedback was positive. We did have some really good questions though, and some really valuable insight that has caused us to think about this. And a couple things before we get started. One, this is the beginning of this process. What we're trying to do here is really in a way thread the needle by bringing together the industry in a way that it hasn't been brought together before. I mean, there's so many different practice areas and opinions and key opinion leaders and stakeholders, and up till this point, most of them have not agreed really on anything. It's been more of a turf war than anything. What I've heard just from the last couple of days, there's really more agreement than disagreement, and I think that's really good. I mean, honestly, I've been happy with the fact that most people are very much on the same page, because even the disagreements that we've had or the comments that we've had have been more out of a lack of, whether it's our drafting or just some of the language or vocabulary that we use. It's not really been strenuous objections to the stances that we're taking, which I think is great. So what we're going to do today is take a little bit at the beginning and give a little bit of a background on how we came up with these standards, a little bit of context, some of the background, and how we put this together. It's been a long time in the making. Kathy, we just lost your video. Oh, there you are. You're back. I do want to give a really heartfelt thank you to both Cathy Christensen and Patrick O'Brien. Kathy's the COO and Patrick is our legal counsel. They have been absolutely vital to development of this. We've been working on these for years, as it feels like, and we've had the involvement of a lot of different people, and it's been it's been fun. It's also been terrifying, and it's also been stressful and confusing at times. But the goal that we're trying to accomplish here is to make this industry safe and compliant, and more than anything, have the public have confidence in us. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to throw it to Cathy. And Cathy, I want you to go over just a little bit kind of what the context is as far as how we came up with this, the process, what we're really trying to do here. And then we'll get into we'll go over very briefly. We're going to kind of fly through the provisions, and then we're going to get into some Q&A. We've got a ton of questions to answer, and we'll get to all of them. One thing before we get started, we are going to answer every frickin' question that comes in, I promise you. If we don't get to it tonight, and we only have an hour, we are going to put on our website a Q&A section where if you have questions, email us. We will get to them. We will answer them. Lastly, this is not a final document. We're not trying to ram anything down people's throats. This is a starting point. This is a discussion. There's meant to be interaction and opinions from other folks. We have tried to do this in a way that is universal and really captures what the law is, as opposed to trying to make the law. And we'll get into that more as we go. And I'm confident that by the time we're done, you'll understand really where we're coming from and what we're trying to do. And then we can go from there. And we'll hopefully get some common ground. And then again, please, if you have questions, comments, anything that bothers you about this, or you like or you don't like, let us know. We are going to address it. We want to make sure that we involve all of our members and the public. And we'll be touching on that as we go. So Cathy, you're up.
Right. Thank you, Alex. As we mentioned, or as Alex mentioned, basically what the practice guidelines, the goals of the practice guidelines have been, is a recommendation to unify the industry and promote safety for patients and compliance for the industry. We've seen time and time again, every time a mistake occurs in the medical aesthetic industry, it seems to make the nightly news, and it's not a great thing for the industry as a whole. So if we don't continue to pay attention to the medical and medical aesthetics, we're concerned that that might cause detriment to the medical spa industry as a whole. So that's kind of the reason we did this. We don't want to get to a point where we're being over-regulated by people outside of the industry. We kind of want to take a swing at doing a self-regulation guidance, and that's kind of what this is at this point. We did our due diligence. Like Alex said, we've been working for about 18 months to complete these standards, probably longer than that. They've been we've been working on them kind of internally. We've worked with physicians from all levels. We've worked with RNs, NPs, PAs, estheticians, just to make sure that we're on the right track. Something to remember, and we're kind of seeing a little bit of concern with some of the comments. Just a reminder, these are recommendations. We're painting with a really broad brush because we're trying to get something that's more of a national recommendation, which isn't easy. Anytime that's done, the details for each situation may not get addressed for every single person. But that's just kind of the nature of the beast right now. So probably the final thing I'd like to say is there has been some misinformation about what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we're doing it. And I just ask that you open your minds. I know there are a lot of people that are very, very concerned about what our recommendations are. And I just ask that we get the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about what our recommendations are and why we're recommending them. And then from that point, we'll address any questions. Like Alex said, we'll have an FAQ question on our website so that you can take a look at those. You can reach out to us via email anytime. The whole point of this is to make the industry united under this. So, and we're grateful for your feedback. It makes everything better. So thank you for your time today. Thank you for joining us. And I'm going to give it back to Alex.
Awesome. Thank you. All of that I agree with. There has been a lot of misinformation, and this is just, the rumor mill gets started. People start talking to each other. It doesn't matter. But I do want to say that a lot of the comments I've gotten have been because folks are for whatever reason are misinformed about how we're trying to go about this. Patrick, I want to get your thoughts real quick because you're highly involved in. For those of you who don't know Patrick, he has been, we lock him in a closet every day and with a phone, and he calls medical boards and researches stuff. So just talk a little bit about the process and how we got here.
Thank you. So these, as Cathy said, are with a really broad brush. If anybody's ever read any of our blogs or articles, you know that each state is very different in how they treat not only the practice of medicine, but also medical spa procedures. But there still is a thread of kind of commonality between them all about prescriptions and just a moment. Sorry, my 3-year-old's trying to join our meeting. But so there is some commonality in how things are formatted in that the practice of medicine sort of flows from the licensed practitioners, the physicians, to the advanced licensees, nurse practitioners, and physician assistants. And everyone sort of works under some version of supervision, and where the authority flows from one license to the next license. So we tried to sort of capture that in a set of guidelines that were generally applicable to kind of all 50 states. That you could, the details won't quite match up, but it'll be mostly there. Then we also looked at specific states that have chosen to pass either rules or regulations about medical spa procedures. Usually it has to do with lasers is the real popular one. Some states have a medical spa registry, some have like advertising requirements. It's very piecemeal here and there. And that's really what we're trying to avoid, is having 100 different laws covering little tiny aspects of the business, and instead trying to have sort of this national guideline that everyone can point to and have some commonality. But we looked at a lot of those and kind of found the ones that were the most workable, that were sort of easy to follow, not very burdensome. The idea is that these are guidelines that can be implemented without having to kind of completely restructure everything. And so we sort of worked with those as some of the kind of ideas and tried to stick it all together into one big thing, and that's where we are.
And here we are. So thank you for that. I think those are great points, and we're gonna get going. I'm gonna share my screen, and we're gonna go through just quickly each of the articles. And again, this is gonna be a general overview, and then because I want to spend most of our time getting to the questions that we've received, because I think you're really gonna see where we're coming from as we answer those. I do want to tack one thing onto what Patrick said, and that is, and he mentioned this, is that we're really trying to simply put forth what the law in many respects already is. This is not, we're not creating new law here. This is, most of the things that we put in here, and I really mean most of it, is already in place. Med spas are already treated as medical facilities because they are medical facilities. Doctors are already in charge because doctors are in charge of medical facilities. All of these things are really already in place. They're just incredibly difficult to find and locate in every single state. And there's never been a consensus for how we put all this together. So we're not pulling this out of thin air. This is stuff that's been around for a long time. We're just consolidating into one spot. And I know there's going to be differences of opinion, and people are going to have thoughts on different things, and that's great. That's fine. We want to hear that feedback. We will listen to everything. We will answer every question. Again, we're not here to tell you kind of what to do. This is a way to provide guidance. For any of you who've known AmSpa, we're all about trying to make sure that the industry is safe and compliant. That's all we're trying to do. So with that said, I'm going to jump into this a little bit. Hang on one sec. And so this is the agenda as you saw earlier. We're going to do a quick general review of the provisions. I don't want to get too much into the specifics because we could literally spend all day. We are going to do other meetings like this. We'll whenever we need to jump on and address things, we'll do it. We're not going to shy away from this. We will then get into, we got a whole bunch of questions, which we've copied and pasted, some of the pertinent ones, and we'll answer those. And then we'll give a quick update on what's going on in Texas, because I think that there's a lot of this that's mixing together, and I think it has an impact. So let's jump into this first. And then, and obviously, Patrick, if you have anything to add, if I miss anything, please correct me, because I don't want to miss anything. But so what we did with this is if there's one rule that we could all just implement, it's this one. It's that this is medical treatment, and we're not trying to create anything here and say that this should now be treated as medical treatment. This is what it is. This is just a statement of fact. Like, if you're a medical spa, you are a medical provider. And that means that you need to be regulated as such. This is not a new phenomenon. This is something that's been going on forever. I think what's happened, though, as the industry has developed, it's grown so fast, and it's a different industry because you're talking about not only medicine, but you're talking about sales, marketing, money, right? There's a lot of money to be made, and it kind of mixes and it becomes a different type of healthcare, but it's still healthcare. And I think that's the key. And if we can all realize that you're running a doctor's office, that's what you're doing. If you can get that kind of in your mindset, then everything else flows from there, right? There's really nothing different. I mean, if we could have this one rule implemented, we could probably go on as is without any types of recommendations or guidelines. The problem is there's so much differentiation between the states, and there's so much going on and so much inconsistency and confusion that's difficult to do. But this is the one that I really want everyone to understand. And again, our definition, and this is not based upon anything other than what's in the actual law right now, impacts living tissue. This is a kind of just a general list of devices. What we're trying to do is to capture everything. We don't want to get to a point where every time a new technology arrives, we're trying to figure out if it's medical or if it's not. I understand there are some ones in here that are going to be a little bit controversial. Microneedling, I think, is probably the big one that jumps out. And I know there are a lot of estheticians out there who do it. The reason we included it here is, and Patrick, I would love for you to jump in on this actually real quick, but is what we found from these medical boards and boards of cosmetology is that they universally find that microneedling is a medical treatment. We have yet to find a state that said, yes, that is not medical treatment. So in those situations, we're trying to not only capture what we want to happen and have consistency, but we're also trying to keep as much of the state law in place. Because what Cathy said was very important. If we don't do this right now, it's going to be done for us. There will be regulation. There's going to be regulation whether we want it or not. If we don't do it, it's going to be done by a state, and that state is going to take things like all of this and make only a physician able to do it. Patrick, does that kind of summarize what we did here?
Yeah, absolutely. It's where cosmetology boards, they will frequently needle use. So like if you're not able to inject something or stick a needle into living tissue, that's sort of what, it's what microneedling is going to be. So while most of them won't necessarily say that it's not included, it's there in the scope of practice.
Yes. Now, and we're not advocating that this is necessarily, we're not trying to force our opinion on it. But this is just kind of a statement of where the law is, and it's any depth. It's because you're using a needle. This is what causes them to characterize it as medical treatment. If there's any of these down the road as we go that we can change the perception and make it more or less admissible for others to do it, we will do so. But this is just kind of the way that it's actually done. Obviously, there's state law exceptions. We had a couple questions about laser hair removal. There's also master estheticians and independent practice that we're going to get to. There are some states, that have characterized laser hair removal as a non-medical procedure, or they have certified it as its own certification. We don't want to interfere with that. So if there is a state that has a state law certification for laser hair removal, we're not going to touch that. That law applies. If there's a master esthetician law, like for example in Oregon, that law applies to those estheticians. We're not going to try to take anything away from what the state has already done. What we will do, though, is in the event that a law hasn't been passed, we want to move all this under one umbrella of medical treatment. So that's where this comes from. Not a whole lot to talk about on this, but again, and we'll get to some of the other things later on. Medical directors, protocols, training. Again, think of this as a doctor's office. And that's really, we're not creating something here. This is the way that it is. And if you're ever in front of the medical board or the nursing board, that's how they are going to treat you right now. So this is just a kind of a definition of that. Therefore, there needs to be a doctor involved. Now, there are exceptions to that when it comes to independent practice with APRNs and potentially PAs. There are some laws that are being discussed about that. But nevertheless, the doctor who is in charge needs to be familiar with aesthetics. This seems like a no-brainer, but it's not always. You'll see doctors come in who become medical directors and they don't seem to know anything about what they're supervising. That's not acceptable, and it's not going to be okay moving forward, because the medical boards are not going to allow a doctor to oversee an entire practice who doesn't know what types of medical treatments are being provided. So that's something that should be in place already. If you have a doctor who is delegating and overseeing injectables who doesn't know what the reversal agents are and what the counterindications or the side effects are, that's not going to be enough. This shouldn't become as a surprise to anybody, but a doctor does need to be involved. Now, there needs to be protocols in place, which of course everybody knows. This is our written protocols between the doctor and the team to understand what's going to happen. Independent practice, we had some questions about that. Nurse practitioners in some states have independent practice. In those circumstances, provided they are in alliance and compliance with their state laws, we are not going to prohibit them from acting within their scope of practice. And in some states, that does mean they can serve as a de facto or in fact a medical director, and they can actually own their own places, and we're not going to interfere with that. But again, whoever's in charge, and this is a physician, again, usually, they are responsible for what goes on in this medical spa. So if you think of it like a doctor's office, when a patient comes in, that patient is the patient of the medical director, of the physician, whoever is kind of in charge. Now, if there are other providers who are involved, there's other responsibilities. But what we're really trying to avoid here is any semblance of an absentee medical director, which is more and more a thing of the past, but it still exists, where you're getting doctors or NPs to kind of lease out their licenses. That is what gets folks in trouble, and that's what gives bad PR, and we want to avoid that. So I'm not going to get too much into that. Again, we're going to go through some of this when we answer questions too. Article 3 is initial diagnosis and treatment plan, and for this one, anyone who's watched AmSpa for any length of time knows that we talk about this all the time. This essentially means a face-to-face examination by a physician, PA, or APRN nurse practitioner, depending on they must be in compliance with their state laws. This is kind of the key to starting the physician-patient relationship. And the genesis of this is that doctors, and by extension, APRNs and PAs, are the ones who practice medicine. So what we're trying to avoid here, what we're really trying to codify and make sure that folks understand, is that only doctors practice medicine. And that means that when it comes to diagnosing, creating a treatment plan, mostly diagnosing, but also prescribing, that's got to come from a doctor, or by extension, if your state allows it and you satisfy those requirements, a PA or an APRN. This is, again, not something that is new to anyone who knows AmSpa. We've been talking about this for a long time, but nevertheless, it really needs to be reiterated because it's a big deal. Telemedicine is okay. We've seen with COVID, telemedicine has exploded, but it was exploding anyway, and that's totally fine. State law applies. So as long as you're in compliance with your state law, you can use FaceTime, Skype, whatever it is for that face-to-face consultation. The key here is what we want is whoever is doing that initial diagnosis needs to be able to make the same diagnosis as if they were in the room with the patient. And there's exceptions to this. It doesn't necessarily have to be, you don't have to do an exam every single time the patient comes in. We're going to flush some of this stuff out. But when a new patient comes in, you've got to have that initial consultation. And just think of it this way. If you go to the doctor or the hospital or wherever, at some point, you're going to see the doctor every single time. There's never a time you go in and only see an RN or a tech. You always eventually see, or a PA or an NP, but you always eventually see them. And that's what we have to remember. These are doctors' offices, these are medical facilities, and therefore, one of those three, doctor, PA, NP, need to see the patient. We kind of get into, where the rubber meets the road when we get into this, provisions of treatments. The provider needs to be qualified. So obviously there's delegation that all these treatments don't need to be done by the doctor or the NP or the PA. They can be delegated downstream to an RN and medical assistants. That person must be qualified. We don't have specific qualifications like number of hours that you have to have. That is something that we are willing to look at. We've got it kind of reserved as far as training goes, but that's a big thing that as an industry, we need to decide how much training is required before you can actually do this. For now, it's up to the medical director. It's up to the supervising physician, or as it's allowed, PA or NP. Those are the ones who need to make a decision and say, I am comfortable with this person doing the treatment that I am delegating them to, and it's up to them. And the way you find out, honestly, if the qualification is enough is, unfortunately, are you comfortable explaining to the medical board that you have trained this person, observed their training, observed their qualifications enough where you are confident that they can perform the treatments? There's got to be protocols in place. That this is going to be an ongoing discussion, because there's lots of protocols. Supervision, there needs to be supervision. So we've had questions about this, and we're going to get into this more, but the main thing is that whoever is in charge, the medical director who is in charge of the services, or if it's a physician who is part of the practice, or if it's an NP or PA, you need to be able to respond, right? These are medical treatments, and although most of them don't have incidents or side effects that are bad or life-threatening, there are some things, as we all know, that can happen. And as a lawyer, I've seen some of these cases go through and go before the medical board, and saying that you have a physician who is on vacation in wherever and is not available to answer a phone if a problem happens is not going to be sufficient. So there's got to be, at least if you're supervising, you've got to be available to respond. Someone's got to be available to respond. Now we're going to get into this more, but RNs, I've had several RNs freaking out, and when I hear their story, I understand why. Who understand that we are trying to restrict them to practice with a physician on site looking over their shoulder. That is not the case at all. We are RNs are generally subject to general supervision, which means they can be left alone in the building and it can be off-site. So a physician doesn't have to be on site all the time, both for an RN and for APRNs. For APRNs and PAs, or NPs and PAs, again, they have their own practice act, so they're really governed by that. And whatever that allows them to do as far as independence, whether they have an independent practice or whether they've got to meet with their physician once a month, whether it's twice a month where they have to have phone calls, whatever it is, each state has their own requirements. We want you to follow those requirements, but supervision does not mean that you have to have somebody in the room all the time while these procedures are going on. I know from talking to you folks, if we required that, nobody could make any money. It would be game over. One of the reasons we're putting this provision in place is that if we don't, and there's continues to be some of this bad PR, this is what's going to happen. This will be the result as legislators kind of attack us, and the pendulum swings much too far the other way, and they will start requiring this. But we don't want that. We're going to go more into this in a little bit, just so you have a better idea. Restrictions. This is where where really start to kind of lay down some of the things that we think are important as far as an industry. Ablative lasers. There were several questions on this, and I want to, and Patrick, I want you to jump in on this too. I do want to address this, because our intention here is not to remove the ability of RNs, NPs, laser techs, MAs to be able to operate lasers once that good faith exam has happened. Ablative lasers it's almost become a legal term in a sense. What we mean by ablative lasers, and for ablative lasers, the way that our guidelines are written right now, we have restricted it to having a physician kind of on site. And the reason we did that is because the way ablative lasers are treated in the industry and legally, this is the the really deep laser where there's a lot of downtime. Oftentimes there's anesthesia involved or there's heavy sedation. We're talking about laser treatments that are going to put someone down for the count. This is not meant to include things like halo treatments. We work with Cyton all the time. Halo treatments are not meant to be involved in this. I assure you, we are going to solicit some additional comments on this because unfortunately ablative lasers, it's maybe not the best term for us to use, but it's the one that is used. Patrick, what do you, anything to add on that?
Yeah, so the ablative, non-ablative kind of dividing line comes up in multiple states. Seems to all of most of them come from like the late 90s and early 2000s. Obviously, very different laser technology at the time. But when they meant ablative, they meant like a surgical type laser that you could, you would cut and cauterize with, and then when used on the face would be for like a full face laser peel, full laser peel.
Yeah.
The newer ones, I don't believe really fall into that, but the terminology and the legislation just doesn't have a better term to differentiate them.
Yeah. And so we will address this. I appreciate we had a lot of comments about that, which I appreciate. We will address it. This is one of those areas where again the law has fallen behind, and this is the terminology that is used. So, but we will solicit additional opinions on that. I would love to hear kind of what your thoughts. But for those of you who have ever seen some of these truly ablative lasers, these old school lasers, this is like, I mean, this is a serious procedure. So that's why they were included here. Microneedling, we've talked about already. This is kind of a flashpoint, but the fact of the matter is right now, the way it's treated is as a medical treatment. Now, we're not saying that estheticians, MAs, RNs, LPNs, LVNs can't do microneedling. All we're doing is saying it's a medical treatment. And as a medical treatment, it needs to, those steps need to be taken, the face-to-face exam, proper supervision, things like that. But I understand that this is often considered to be a very minor, non-invasive treatment. Unfortunately, right now, that's not how it's addressed in the medical board. And you see what happened, in, I think it was New Mexico, where they had the HIV transmission through this. That's why. So this is something we're going to be looking at and working on. Injectables. This has been a flashpoint for some folks. We have talked to, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to about this issue. And we have uniformly, the opinion is that injectables should be performed by an RN or higher. So that's RN, PA, NP, or physician. I know there are estheticians, there are LPNs, LVNs out there who do injectables. I know it, and I know you've been doing it for a long time, and many of you have been doing it without any problem and have been making money and have had no problems at all. This is what we are being told is the standard of care. And from a liability standpoint, it's difficult from when we talk to lawyers, when we talk to plastic surgeons, we talk to non-core physicians, to RNs, it's difficult to justify anybody without some sort of medical licensure, some sort of medical certification to be doing injectables. Now, this does not mean that the physician needs to be on site overlooking the RN or the PA or the NP all the time. The way we have this set up is that once you get that initial physician-patient relationship and the initial diagnosis, the delegation can happen, and we'll get to this more in the next slide, and then RN, if the RN, it's typically an RN, they can do these injections without the physician being on site. Again, provided the physician is available, or the NP or the PA, depending on where you are. But we have drawn a line, and that line is north of estheticians and south of RNs. And this is based upon a lot of information that we've gotten. I will have conversations with with others. I actually just talked today with a couple leaders in the in aesthetic field, because I wanted to double check our thoughts on this, and they both were 100% supportive of what we're doing. But nevertheless, you know, I think there's a conversation that can be had there, but this is where we've drawn the line. MAs and laser techs. So this is where we kind of get a little bit confusing with the nomenclature. We will allow, and it's perfectly allowable under our guidelines, for non-licensed people, which are MAs and laser techs, to perform medical treatment. So we're not restricting lasers from being fired by RNs and above. MAs and laser techs can in fact fire lasers. They can in fact be trained, and provided they're supervised and they are qualified and the medical director has deemed them to be qualified, there's nothing wrong with having them firing the laser. What we do require and what we do want, and this is straight from the medical boards, this is directly from the medical boards, is whenever you're performing medical treatment, you need to have some sort of medical licensee on site. So what we don't want is laser techs and MAs who have no medical training, right? They're trained by the laser companies often, they're trained by other institutes, and that's great, and they need to be trained. But we can't have them with no medical training operating totally alone. There's got to be somebody on site. We have chosen an RN because an RN kind of appears to be the way, from what we've talked to, the lowest level, meaning an RN at least needs to be on site when these laser techs or MAs are operating lasers in case there's some sort of a problem. Estheticians, we've talked about. Estheticians play a huge role in this industry, and I really want to make sure that that we understand that they are included in this industry, and that they're a main driving force in this industry. All we're saying is that, and by the way, estheticians are not prevented from doing laser treatments. One of the big questions we've had is, I'm an esthetician, I can't do laser treatments? No, that's not true. What we're saying is, as an esthetician, you are governed by your Practice Act. And again, we're not trying to change every Practice Act. And your Practice Act as an esthetician says that you cannot perform any medical treatment. That's across the board. Now that may change, and when it does, will change. But that's what it says right now. As such, you as an esthetician cannot perform laser treatments. But what you can do is you can do it if you're operating as a laser tech or an MA. Meaning, just because you're an esthetician doesn't mean you're locked out, not at all. It just means that you have to be conscious of the fact that you don't want to violate your Practice Act. And unless we're going to go and change every single Board of Cosmetology's Practice Act for estheticians, which would take 100 years, we're going to have to be conscious of this. So you can still do it. You've just got to make sure that you're operating as an MA or a laser tech when you do it. And it's a distinction with a difference. So, and we'll get into more about this. In fact, we'll probably end up doing like a whole webinar on this by itself, because I want to make sure folks understand exactly what we're saying. Ownership, and I know there's going to be questions on that, and we're going to get to some more of the information when we get to the Q&A, but we're running a little bit behind. Ownership and compensation. We do not, and this is one thing I really want to drive home, because for whatever reason, this has been running. I've gotten so many emails about, number one, about supervision of RNs, which was completely wrong, and then ownership. We do not take any position on ownership. And I truly mean that. We do not care. What we want you to do is follow the law that's in place in your state. And that is all that we are saying. Your state law applies. So the other thing is that you need to make sure that medicine, the well-being of the patient, is what is driving patient care. Meaning, the reason these ownership issues are even in place in the first place is because medical boards don't want CEOs and someone who's driving the bottom line to be making decisions about patient care. It needs to be the physician in charge. This is the practice of medicine. But whatever your state allows you to do, we want you to do. There's absolutely no prohibition on ownership. We really don't care at all. So for those of you who are worried that we're trying to force through physician ownership, that's absolutely not the case. it's really, in the whole grand scheme of things, who owns the practice is less important than the safety and the supervision and the face-to-face exam and the experience of the providers. Who owns it is really not not as big of a deal. But we also know that people do get in trouble for this. And we've seen it happen. It's happened in Texas, and it's happened otherwise. We are going to have more information on this with respect to Texas and other states as we go. We're gonna we'll do a webinar, some podcasts with our friends at Bernardo and Patrick to really dig into this. The other thing, independent practice. We are not trying to exclude nurse practitioners from being able to do what they are allowed to do in their particular state. So right now, nurse practitioners are in many states. I think there's like 40 some states, and then 20 some they're totally independent. They can practice independently, and that's great. In those situations, provided they are meeting the regulations and the requirements of their particular state, they can do that, and they can basically run a med spa, right? And we have no problem with that. They can own it. Now, there's other things they have to watch out for, which are of consequence that they need to be careful of, as far as advertising, marketing, and things like that. But if you have independent practice and you're an NP and you satisfy all the regs, there's no way we're going to prohibit you from doing whatever you're allowed to do. That's not our intention at all. But please understand, ownership is not something we are focused on at all. All we're doing is saying, this is what your state requires. Do it, follow it. We want you to be compliant. We want you to be safe. We don't want you to get in trouble. I skipped marketing and advertising because we got no questions on it, and I think it's kind of lesser importance right now. So what I want to do now is dive into some of the questions that we got. We received a ton of questions. We've tried to consolidate them all into areas where they kind of all represent each other. So I'm going to go into a few of them. Patrick, I want to get your opinion as well on some of these. And I think when we're done with this, in addition to what you've seen with the practice guidelines, what we've said tonight, I really think you'll get a good idea of where we're trying to go with this, and we can start actually having more of a conversation about how we move forward. So these are real questions that we've gotten. Are you suggesting that a physician be in the same room during an ablative procedure while a PA, NP, RN performs the procedure, including Halo? Halo, by the way, for those of you who don't know, is a treatment. It's a brand-specific treatment by Cyton. So the way it's drafted right now, we are requiring for ablative procedures for a physician to be on site. And the reason we're doing that is because of what we said before. The ablative procedures that we're talking about are very extreme, with a lot of downtime, and often take anesthesia of some sort. We are going to look at this because we've had enough feedback, and I think the technology is such where it's worth getting some additional opinions on, and we will adjust the language accordingly, because I promise you, a Halo treatment, I don't consider Halo to be an ablative treatment. I really don't. I know it has some ablative properties, but I don't. And I know the Cyton folks very well. We've had this conversation. I really don't believe that's an ablative treatment. But nevertheless, we need to make sure that the language reflects that. So understand that we have heard you. We are not going to have, for every laser treatment that comes that you're offering, have a doctor have to be on site. That's not what we're doing. Most laser procedures that we see our med spas doing are non-ablative. And for non-ablative procedures, once that face-to-face exam happens, you don't need to have a physician on site. You can delegate downstream. An RN can do it by him or herself. A PA and NP can do it by him or herself. You can have MAs and laser techs doing it. They can even do the treatments, provided there is supervision on site of some sort, and that means an RN in our view. So that's one thing I really want to get. I want to get clear, because we've had a ton of questions about that, and we'll continue to look into this. Question number 2: are you saying an RN cannot insert PDO threads unless a physician is physically on site in the room? No, that's not what we're saying. I don't know where that came from. But injectables, when we talk about injectables, We are saying that RNs and above should be doing injectables. So we are saying that estheticians should not be doing injectables. But the RN is able to perform his or her duties under general supervision, which means off-site. It can mean off-site. So as long as the physician is available to respond by the phone, there's no reason that the physician has to be in the room or even in the building. So that's all injectables, and we include PDO threads in that. So please understand that there's no need. RNs can operate as they've always been operating. I don't think an RN, correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, but I don't think an RN scope of practice has been changed at all with our guidelines. Am I wrong about that?
No, we in all of their places, it still is under general supervision, which is kind of that nebulous, the opinion of the physician can be on site, can be off site, but
right. And again, the difference here is maybe ablative lasers, right? So we'll have to figure that out. Like the really severe, and when we talk about that, like it's also like I'm thinking like liposuction. Like you're not going to have liposuction being performed without without a physician hopefully present at the facility somewhere, because those are serious procedures. Okay, next question. Are you trying to push medical spas to be physician-owned only, essentially putting hundreds of thousands of trained professionals out of business and in debt? Again, no. We do not take any position on physician ownership. I will say that again and again, and I want you to tell your friends. Everyone tell 2 or 3 friends that I said this. We do not take any position on physician ownership. We are not pushing med spas to be owned by physicians. If you ask me, and if we're in front of the medical board, I could care less who owns it, as long as the med spa is safe and you've got people who are trained and qualified. Our friends at Bertodato who help with all of our legal analysis, I had a conversation with them yesterday. They, in any state where there is where anyone can own a med spa, that's the way they go. Like there's this mechanism called an MSO that you use when you have a state where only physicians can own it. And we only do that when you're in a state like that, or if the client advises of that. So please understand, we're not trying to push for physician only ownership. Just we all need to put that to bed. All right, next question. Are you saying that microneedling, dermaplaning, advanced chemical peels, laser treatments, and injections are no longer allowed to be performed by anyone under an RN, and in most cases, a physician must be supervising their delegation by being present in the room during treatments? This is kind of a repeat of the question from before, and the answer is emphatically no. Microneedling, dermaplaning, chemical peels, laser treatments, injections, other than injections, all of those can be performed by MAs or laser techs as it is, provided there's proper supervision and delegation procedures in place. And the physician does not necessarily have to be on site, and they certainly don't have to be in the room. It depends very much on the type. I've got a cat who's chiming in. I knew that was going to happen. It depends on the treatment to an extent. So with injections, we are saying, yes, under an RN, you can't do it. That's the position we've taken right now. But laser treatments, dermaplaning, microneedling, chemical peels, those can be delegated to MAs and or laser techs as it happens. Estheticians, also, you estheticians out there, you can do these treatments. Chemical peels, obviously, but laser treatments, dermaplaning, microneedling, those things, you can do them provided you are acting as a medical assistant, as you're acting as a laser tech, not as an esthetician. And this is not our choice. This is just this is how the statutes are drafted, and we're trying to, this is all like a kind of we're threading the needle here. We're trying to create consistency and make sure that everyone understands what the rules are, but at the same time respect the state's laws that are in existence. because there's just no possible way that we can go and overturn all of those. It's just, so we're really trying to understand that, you know, what they require, what they restrict, and allow full functioning operation of the med spas under those rubrics. Patrick, anything to add? Am I missing something? Anything?
You're doing great.
All right. These next two are actually, we'll leave that up there too. How do licensed professional laser hair removal technicians fit into the guidelines? I made a typo there. And I thought the next one dealt with independent practice of NPs. There are states that have laser hair removal certifications. Texas, Georgia are two of the ones that jump out. In those states where you are a certified laser hair removal technician by the state, and they have created a separate practice act for you, you are allowed to operate under your guidelines. We're not going to mess with that. If you are not in a state like that, and there's a few of them, but not very many of them, then you are falling under the exact same situation as laser techs and MAs, meaning you can still operate it, but you need to have that physician oversight, the face-to-face consultation, and things like that. Licensed laser techs for hair removal in those states that have it, they can actually operate independently, and we're not going to mess with that. So we want to make sure that's in place. But other than that, we absolutely want to have hair removal be in the same category as other laser treatments, because those of you who know laser hair removal techniques, that can be as dangerous as anything as far as burns go. Estheticians can't operate lasers, WTF. Yes, you can. You just can't do it while serving as an esthetician. And that's a really, really kind of silly, dumb thing, but there's nothing we can do about that until the Board of Cosmetology and the Practice Act that deals with estheticians addresses that. So if we want to change that, and you get it changed, then I'm happy to get on board with that. I really am, because I know that estheticians do this all the time. Some of the best trainers that I've ever met are estheticians as far as laser treatments. But nevertheless, like at this point, you still can do it. You're just operating under wearing a different hat. And I know that sounds silly, but it's kind of the world that we live in. What about states where NPs have complete autonomy? What this is referring to is independent practice of nurse practitioners, right? So there are states, several states that I talked about already, where nurse practitioners have passed legislation that gives them independent practice. They can practice without, excuse me, without a agreement with a physician, without physician oversight. They can basically be on their own within whatever specialty that they've chosen, and within their training and their qualifications. We're not, one question we got was, are we going to go to those states and force them to not be able to own med spas? No, not at all. In those states, they can operate as they've always operated. We are not trying to take anything away from them in states with independent practice, and there are going to be more of them. California just introduced a bill that actually got passed and is waiting to be signed by the governor for independent practice in California, which would be a huge game changer there. That's fine. We are 100% on board with that. We think it's needed. We think it's necessary. We need more nurse practitioners, not less. Next question. I've heard RNs need to have a doctor supervising on site for all treatments. This was a comment that we got from a panicked RN that we know very well, who literally was like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to have to go back to school and become a nurse practitioner because you guys are saying that I need to have a doctor on site. No, that's not the case. Don't know where that came from, but I promise you, I want you to tell 10 friends about this one. We do not require on-site, in-person supervision of RNs. Nothing is going to change with respect to RNs, with respect to how they're practicing. As long as they're trained and qualified and you meet all the other provisions, the face-to-face consultation, proper delegation, all the protocols are in place, you can do what you're doing without having a doctor on site overseeing you. I promise. Everybody can go have a drink and not worry about this. I promise. I'm not lying here. It's in our document, and we'll get to it more as we go. But this is a big one, so please understand that we're serious about that. Do med spa guidelines apply to a surgical practice? For example, do we have to have a medical director? This was an interesting question. Patrick, why don't you take this one? I know what the answer is, but I'm kind of curious because I think you answered it when we were chatting about it.
Yeah, so when we were drafting these, it was mainly looking at the typical medical spa aesthetic practice where the physician is not the one performing the majority of the procedures, and not added a surgical practice. Many of the guidelines may be helpful for kind of a plastic surgery practices to implement on their less invasive side if they want. But they're not really, they weren't meant to be included. But as a practical matter, they probably already do have a medical director. It's not a formal position in most states, but you're going to have some, physician or someone who's in charge of kind of training and making sure things operating correctly, and that might be the owner or managing partner or something. So in practice, I think the guidelines can definitely be applied in surgical practice, but that wasn't really their original intent.
Yep, that's exactly what I was going to say. Next question: how do licensed professional hair removal technicians will fit into the guidelines? I think I repeated this one. And I just had the same typos before. Again, professional hair removal with certified in your state, you can continue to act as if. If it's a state with no certification for licensed hair removal technicians, then it's treated as medical treatment and you're the same as a laser tech or an MA. Are you recommending that Texas med spas need to be owned by a physician owned by, are you recommending that Texas med spas need to be physician owned by law? No. Now here's the rub here, and Texas is a really interesting state that we're going to talk about here more in a second. We are not advocating for one position or another. We're not saying Texas med spas should be owned by physicians. What we are saying is that in Texas, the corporate practice of medicine, which prohibits non-physicians from owning, has in fact been enforced. And it is alive and well, and there's been instances where people have gotten in trouble for it. So that's all we're saying, is that the state of Texas has this law. Follow it or not follow it. It's not top of the line, like the biggest thing they're concerned about. In fact, most of the time, people don't get in any trouble for ownership unless they're getting in trouble for something else. So it's not something that's going to be the leading edge of the sword. But we're not going to be advocating for ownership in one way or the other. And just as a practical matter, I mean, aesthetics is a tiny, tiny fraction of healthcare. I don't think it would be appropriate for us to try to change the law of ownership just because of aesthetics. I mean, that's up to the state. It's up to the healthcare system of that particular state. Okay, that was actually it. Patrick, any last thoughts on any of this stuff? Anything that I missed?
I think you talked about it at the beginning, but master estheticians and advanced estheticians,
yes,
they're so if you look in the section 5, we sort of cover this, that there are states that have adopted sort of expanded scopes, and as long as the medical director approves of them performing them at the site, then they can do things that are within their scope of practice.
That's a great point. And I'm glad you brought that up, because we did have a question about that. And again, this just goes to show, like, we're not trying to restrict estheticians. All we're doing is saying you must perform within your practice act. And if you have a master esthetician license and it allows you to do expanded things, and the medical director thinks that you're qualified and approves it, you can do it. There's nothing wrong with that. So master estheticians continue to act as if, and nothing changes there. I'm sure there's more questions. We're going to go ahead and give out Patrick's cell phone number, and you can text him and call him any time of the day. He's got little kids, but they don't mind. But no, seriously, email us, and we'll make sure to answer them. Again, we're in the next couple of days, we'll have a Q&A section on our website where we're going to be just kind of housing these questions and filling them in and answering them. So we'll get that up and we'll get it to you. We're not trying to ram this down anyone's throat tomorrow. This is not, this is a work in progress. So don't think that things are going to all of a sudden start shutting down tomorrow. That's not the case. And we will get to all of your questions. We want to make sure that this is an inclusive process where everybody knows exactly what we're trying to do. We're not trying to sneak up on anybody or do anything different. So from our perspective of the guidelines, that's all we have. I do want to take just 1 minute and talk about what's going on in Texas. For those of you who are in Texas, Texas has been a hotbed for medical spa activity, including bad activity. So we have developed, in conjunction with these guidelines, a piece of legislation that we want to have passed in Texas that reflects what these guidelines say. And again, this is meant to reflect what the law in Texas is. The glaring exception, and I know that some of our folks out there who know this, is estheticians who inject. And there are estheticians in Texas who do inject, and I know there are some who are probably doing a great job of it. This is our position right now. There's lots of opinions on that, and we're going to address them and we're going to get to them. But I do want to make sure that you understand what we're doing in Texas. Number one, it's separate from the guidelines, so we're not trying to hide anything from anybody. But right now, it is in the process of being finalized. The way it works, and I'm not 100% familiar with the legislative process in Texas. We have a lobbyist down there who's been helping us, and it is currently in, what do they call it, Patrick? Like the legislative drafting committee or something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, legislative drafting service.
So they're like putting it together, and that requires some changes. Once it's done, and then we will release it for people to look at. Like, we're not trying to, again, there's been some misinformation out there where people have been saying, why aren't you letting us see it? We're happy to let you see it. It's just, I don't want to let you see it now and then it gets changed, because then we're going to get all wrapped up in craziness. But this is something that we feel very strongly about. We think Texas is the great place to do it because it's the biggest state for medical spas, and I think there's a lot going on there. It's going to mirror these guidelines, so we're not going to try to do anything different. We'll share it when they're ready. We do not address ownership in this law, okay, in this bill. We do not address ownership in the bill. There's not a single piece of language. The only language that might be in the bill about ownership is that we don't address it. That's really the only thing that we say. Like, we really don't do it. So I understand that some of you are a little freaked out about that. We're not going to mess with ownership at all. We will have more information on this coming very, very, very shortly. This is a work in progress. It's moving along. Hopefully we'll have more information to share with everybody later on. We welcome additional opinions. We welcome all the key opinion leaders to offer what they want to hear. But this is going to be kind of a long process that we're really just at the very, very beginning of. Okay, that's it. That's all I got. We have an email address, info@americanmedspa.org. Email us those questions if you have any, or call Patrick's cell phone. He's more than happy to stay up all night and answer them, and he'll forward them to me if he doesn't. Cathy, anything to add in closing?
I think the only thing that I would say is the way that we drafted these was to support the industry, and that's the reason we've always been here. It's the reason we've supported through COVID, through everything else. Our mission is to support the industry. So knowing that, I just kind of want to reassure people that feel like we're doing something differently. The truth of the matter is, if you're not successful, we're not successful. So we're all in this together, and I just kind of want to reiterate that.
Yeah, no, I think that's that bears repeating, and this is not something we take lightly. We understand that this industry has been around longer than us, and it will be around longer than us. And so we're not trying to force anything on anybody. What we are trying to do, though, is this is an industry where you've got so many different practice acts and so many different areas, and there's never been any consistency, despite the fact that there's probably more agreement than disagreement. So we're really trying to let's find this common ground. These are the rules of the road that we can all operate in. By the way, one reason that we're doing this also is how many of you have ever been frustrated because you know another med spa down the street is not following the rules and you are, right? It's more expensive, it's more burdensome to have to do that when they're not doing it. And that's not fair. We want to have fair competition. We want to have the public support us. So that's why we're doing this. We're a little over an hour, but we pretty much did it. So thank you so much for tuning in. Let us know your questions. We will be back with more. This is not going to be something where we're going to cut everybody off. We had planned on doing this a lot earlier in the year, but with COVID, we got a little bit sidetracked, but here we are. So thank you all so much for your time and attention. And we look forward to having more conversations with you about this. Thanks.